Good day, everyone. My name is Gail Spencer, and I currently serve as the president of the Council for Advancement of Standards in Higher Education, better known as CAS. And today I'm really pleased to be joined by the 10th president of CAS, Ralph Johnson. In honor of our 45th anniversary, we have interviewed all of the past presidents. Ralph did that job, so today he gets to be in the interviewee seat, and I get to
Yes.
interview him. So
Right.
welcome, friends.
Well,
So Ralph, how did you come to be connected to CAS?
that story I like to teasingly say I was sort of a convenient date. At that time, 2005, 2006, the sitting CAS representative for the Southern Association of College Student Affairs, better known as SACSA, was deciding to step down. So the leadership at that time looked around to determine who would be the next CAS representative. And what they were looking for was someone who was relatively close to DC so that it would not be as costly to send a representative or representatives to the CAS at that time board meeting. And so they just sort of looked around and they zeroed in on me right here in Maryland, like, Ralph, you were right there by DC. Would you be willing to serve? And I'm like, why not? Sure. I didn't know as much about CAS at that time, but I certainly knew of it and had used it tangentially for some work I was doing at Hopkins. So I accepted the opportunity, and the rest, like they say, is history.
That's great. Yeah, as I understand it, when CAS first started, a lot of people they tried to get people who are geographically close to that, and it's
Right,
probably much different now.
right,
So why is CAS important in higher education, and how did you use CAS in your own student affairs work?
right. Well, over these 18 years that I've been serving on the uh, board and now council, it has become crystal clear to me how absolutely important CAS is to our work as student affairs and higher education professionals. The fact that we have vetted resources that help people assess and review their work is so absolutely critical. And many people are not as familiar with what we call the CAS process, but the fact that we have 40 plus organizations coming together in this consortium with at least one representative, many of them two representatives meeting throughout the year to look at these standards, to create these standards, and to update them and revise them to make them and keep them current and relevant is really important. Without these CAS standards, we would not have opportunities to do thorough reviews and assessments of our programs to determine that they are actually meeting our overall objective, which is student learning, development, and success. So there's a significant place for CAS in the higher ed spectrum, and there are opportunities for us to continue providing those support as we continue to tweak our resources to keep us relevant as an organization and as a tool for assessment and review.
Great. So what standards were new while you were on the council and board? And what associations joined CAS in those years? That's a pretty hard question if you were involved for 18 years, but we'll see what kind of memory you have.
Right. Well, you're testing that memory
Yeah.
in that sense. And I can honestly say that within the window of time that I've served on the council, we may have had one to two new organizations join the organization or the consortium. Uh, but I want to focus in on the standards that I know that I've been involved with and the significant standards that we have created during the time that I served on the council. Number one, when I first stepped into the CAS space, 2006, 2007, we were looking at standards for college unions. And that was the first committee that I served on. And it was actually chaired by the then president of CAS, Jan Armidio. It was my introduction into CAS, and I just thoroughly enjoyed working with her and with the committee and the work that we did. And so that really solidified my interest in remaining as a part of the CAS process. And throughout the time that I was there, I've worked with College Honor Society standards. I led that group. I worked with testing standards, and I want to kind of lean in on that for just a moment. I'll come back to it. I've served with esports standards, and I'll lean in on that a little bit as well. But what I found interesting is the slight difference in updating a set of current standards that already exist versus creating a set of standards. And I've been on committees where I've had to do both. The standards that I actually worked with to create were testing programs and services, starting from scratch. And so trying to create a process and build a scaffold, as it were, to move a new set of standards into our space to work on was really interesting and very exciting for me. Then there were the standards that already existed, such as college honor societies. But the college honor society standards at the time when my committee began working to revise them were a difficult set of standards to work through because when they were initially written, we weren't sure the audience they were trying to speak to. It looked as though they were internal to honor societies and not to the student affairs professional who would be utilizing those standards. So we had to navigate around a number of concerns to try to get those standards completely changed and updated. And we're really happy that we were able to do that. So over the course of those 18 years, I really worked on a number of committees, both to create and to revise standards. The last one that I really want to kind of lean in on a bit more was the esports standards. That's the last committee that I served on. And as you know, Gail, that was so exciting to us because we looked out into the higher ed space to see what were some of the challenges that were emerging, some of the things that were, as the students like to say, popping off. And we saw, hey, esports is really growing in higher ed. And that whole space was described quite a bit as the wild, wild west, with not as many standards, not a whole lot of policies and procedures around how these programs should look, where they should land, who's responsible for them, et cetera. And so we wanted to come in. Ray Plaza, who was the member at large for standards, actually led the committee, and I served on that committee. And so we were able to look at everything that was going on out there in the esports world, bring together a significant number of experts in that field, one of which I'm proud to say included my son, who helped us because that's his space. And then we created these set of standards and we got slightly ahead of the game, or maybe just in time to make this contribution to higher education. So that's just how exciting CAS is, that we can look at what's already there, update and create new standards when it comes to what's going on in higher ed so that we are keeping a pace of the multiple changes that we always see.
Does CAS have any particular highlights or accomplishments during your term as president, maybe highs or lows that you?
Yes. So Gail, as you recall, we had this major world catastrophe known as the pandemic.
Mm.
And that really affected the operations for everything that we had to experience as human beings on this planet. That includes CAS. And so we experienced the pandemic just as I was coming into the role of president. Dan Bureau, who was my predecessor, led us through the pandemic. And then as soon as my tenure began as president is when we were beginning to try to come out of that major epidemic. And so working us through and getting us ready to experience CAS in the way we had traditionally done so was very, very important. So one of the first meetings, in fact, the first meeting we had following the pandemic was during my presidency. And so it was really interesting to kind of bring us back into an in-person experience rather than, all of the virtual meetings that we had all the way through for about 2 years. And so that was very interesting. The other thing that we did during my presidency was to launch the 11th version of our quote book of standards, the Blue Book, as we affectionately call it. We made a major decision, as you know, to move from a printed platform to a completely electronic platform. That was a huge decision. We did quite a bit to test our audiences to determine whether or not folks were ready for that. And we just got resounding support to move forward in that sense. And under the leadership of our new editor, we were able to then introduce the 11th version in a completely electronic format during my presidency. Also during that presidency, we launched the uh, huge task of redoing our website. And that took a good 2 years to work through, as you know. And we looked at every detail, how we would merge together all the pieces to make an effective, comprehensive, robust bookstore, as well as, well, I should say store, not bookstore, as well as the other side of how individuals interacted with CAS overall through the website. And our executive director, along with the entire governing board, worked tirelessly to move that forward. And although it did not officially open until a month past my presidency, I credit a lot of that time that we spent on it during my tenure as CAS president. And then, of course, I am very happy that we began thinking about the history, preparing ourselves for the 45th anniversary, and looking forward to giving people some insights into who these past presidents were. I did some research to try to find out when a particular person served as president and couldn't find it in one place. So that's when I came forward with the idea of at least putting onto the website a historical, pictorial history of all the past presidents and the years that they served. And then following that, we decided to do the interviews as a historical, but I just finished my presidency at that point, and during my past presidency tenure, when we launched and really moved forward with these interviews. So those are some significant things that I'd like to highlight during my presidency.
Yeah, there are a lot of moving parts.
Yes.
And I think the website, we probably started on that about 10 years too late, but that's a story for another day. But the new one's fantastic for sure.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So can you think of any other outstanding moments or experiences that you had while you served as president?
Well, you know, I want to say a couple things real quick, and this preceded me as president by several years, but I think it's important to note because we began to really focus on, well, let me back up. We started, as you know, really looking at how we could enhance program review. And our whole focus for many years was how do we create a set of standards, give people a tool to quantify their review, and those resources were in place for a number of years. But around 2004, maybe 2005, we began to lean in on student development outcomes. And we really focused in on those and infused those into the CAS standards. Following that, we focused on how do we enhance overall assessment. So we moved from simple program review to really looking at how we enhance student learning, development, and success, and then how do we provide opportunities for a thorough assessment process. And it was during Gavin Henning's presidency, followed by Dan, that we really began to look at how do we partner with assessment organizations and individuals really doing assessment in higher education. So I think it's important to note that shift and maybe an ongoing opportunity for CAS to broaden and spread its influence in higher education by really leaning in on that whole area of assessment. And we now, as you know, have done quite a few things in the last few years to shore up that particular aspect of the CAS products and the CAS resources.
Yep. What is your assessment of CAS over the past few years?
Let's see, I thought about how to respond to that question, and what I've landed on is that CAS began with a noble aspirational goal, something that had not been done in higher education. And if you listen to the interviews of some of the past presidents that we've talked to, this whole idea of responding to some concerns that were raised as we began to become more solidified as a profession and needing to legitimize student affairs, as a professional area with resources led to us looking at how we would create these resources now called CAS standards. And so over the course of that time, I think we have really enhanced and improved our work. We have enhanced and improved our process for creating standards, for updating standards, trying to shorten the time frame by which they are actually revised. At one point it was every 10 years. We worked very, very, very hard to narrow that window so that it's, and hopefully at this point, maybe every 6 to 8 years. I know you all will continue doing that so that we are staying abreast of what's going on in higher education, that we are keeping crisp and sharp and all those kinds of things. So my assessment is that CAS, as a professional organization, as a consortium, started out with a noble aspirational cause that we continue to tweak, we continue to enhance. And I believe that we do quite a bit of internal assessment to make sure that we are meeting the objectives and the needs of the profession. I applaud you for the work that you're doing right now in doing those kinds of assessments to determine how we will remain relevant and how we will remain a viable part of the profession. And it is those opportunities to do self-reflection that we're asking the professionals to do, we ourselves are also doing as an organization. I think it's critically important. So my assessment is that we have done a great job. We started with a noble cause, and we continue to tweak and enhance that cause as we remain relevant within the higher education space.
Yeah, kind of a sidebar of what you've been talking about. We're working, our archives are at Bowling Green State University. We've asked the archivist to try to find the first set of standards we wrote, because I think in 45 years, we're interested to see how those are the same or different. So absolutely. I'm waiting to hear back. So.
And I can also mention, as you know, that we jokingly talk about the old way versus the current way of how we actually review standards. And I was fortunate enough to be a part of the old way, as well as what we're currently doing relative to how we review standards prior to actually endorsing and voting on those standards. Well, I shouldn't say vote on, but because we like to say that we do it in a way where there's collaboration and consensus, but the overall objective is that that process has been tweaked itself, and we're much more efficient in how we utilize our time in creating and updating those standards for the profession.
So do you, off the record, maybe prefer the old way or the new way?
Well, there's value in both. There was something really interesting and tedious and time consuming about the old way that forced us into more conversations and dialogue, having those, profound arguments as we wordsmith was fun in some ways. It was a lot of time. And I think if we want to utilize our time the best, then I'll have to land on and lean toward the new process itself. But there's something to be said about the discourse and the dialogue and the conversation and the arguments and the debates and the rebuttals that we experienced around that table when we were, quote, using the old method of reviewing standards as an entire board, at the meetings, which, as you know, we actually met in person twice a year.
Yeah.
And we whittled that down for efficiency and effectiveness of time and resources.
Yeah. And I think I was when I came in, I was the tail end of those old days, but the community was stronger because, and I think people were probably overall, everyone was more engaged in looking at standards. Not that the new way isn't good, but we couldn't continue to do that for a myriad of reasons.
Yeah, it was not sustainable, and we realized that as well. But it was fun. It had its place.
If you like to argue about if something was a noun, a verb, a pronoun, or whatever. What is your hope for the future of CAS?
Well, that it will remain viable, it will remain current, that people will see, folks in the profession will continue to look toward CAS to provide these wonderful resources. I know that we went from just the simple standards and contextual statements and to standards, contextual statements, and our SAGs. You know, we hate the acronym, but the self-assessment guides. And now we have these other resources that we have added to our reservoir of resources over the last several years. So my hope is that CAS will continue to look outward to see what's going on in higher education, to get ahead of the trends, the challenges, and use those opportunities to create the resources that our professionals would need in order to do their work effectively. And I know that we're continuing to do that. And so my hope is that, 45 years from now, when we are, you know, beyond our own span of time, that people will still see CAS, use CAS, and see it as a viable resource for their work within student affairs / higher education.
Yeah. So you told me that you've been involved in CAS for 18 years and
Yes,
you just went to your last meeting, as I understand, correct?
right. That is correct.
How does it feel to uh, retire, so to speak, from that and walk away?
Well, I'm going to use a term that some would consider trite, but it's so absolutely true. It's a bittersweet moment. It really was. In addition to the accolades and the support that I received from CAS itself, I also received a resolution from SACSA, which was my home organization that sent me to CAS. And you do your work, you are committed to your work, and you don't really think about. But after 18 years of doing that work and folks recognizing your contribution that you may have actually done and taken for granted was it was a moving moment. And it's going to be difficult to let go, but it's also an opportunity to move out of the way and let new ideas and new folks with different energy and perspectives come onto the scene. And we've done that within SACSA because they selected the person who would step in now as the new representative come to CAS. And of course, moving through the CAS leadership itself and serving as the past president gave me a chance to sort of, rev down, as it were. And I'm ready to, the baton has been passed, it was passed to you, and we're so grateful that you're willing to take that. And, I'm going to fade into the sunset, as it were. And like we always say, move over into the pasture and just live knowing that I have enjoyed making the contribution to SACSA and to CAS through this medium. It has been the best professional development experience that I've had over the course of my few years as a student affairs professional.
Yeah, well, obviously we aren't paid for what we do, and I think the friendships and the camaraderie and community and the spirit of why we do standards is really a fine thing. And I think one of the unfortunate things is that you were on for 18 years. When I'm done, I will have been on for about 12. And we don't see people stay that long anymore for a
Right.
myriad of reasons. But I think it's helpful to the organization for people to have some history and context. So we
Yes.
appreciate
Yeah.
you. Uh, 18 years is a long time, Ralph.
I know.
So, um, are there any other things you want to say or topics as we wrap up? Was there something I didn't ask you that you wanted to make sure that made it into your past president talk today or discussion? Can you
Well,
think of anything else?
I think that I want to lean in on one thing, and that is the composition of CAS is determined by the professional associations that send representatives to our council meetings. And my big ask is that as professional associations are trying to identify who they'll send, that they identify individuals who truly have a passion for this work and who will come into the CAS space ready to make those contributions by serving at the various levels on the revision committees to create and to update standards, on the other committees, and to be able to do that work with joy. I mean, I thoroughly enjoyed this, and I hope that people come in with the same idea that I'm doing this, I enjoy the work, and it's not just drudgery, or they're there just because it happened to be their time to serve their association. Because I think when we have folks who come with the desire to serve and the joy to do the work, that CAS itself benefits tremendously. And like you said, those of us who have served long tenures, we're becoming fewer and fewer. I hate to see that go by the wayside because it takes a while, as you know, to come into the CAS space and to really get a sense of what's going on. By the time you really understand and know, 3 or 4 years have already passed. And if your tenure is only 3 or 4 years, then I don't know if it's a benefit to you or the association as much as having someone who's been around for a bit longer. So my desire is that whoever these professional associations send to us is that they are committed to the work, they are anxious and excited about the work, and they will make their significant contribution so that in 45 years, the next 45 years, CAS will continue to be the organization that it has become.
Well, that's all the questions I have. One of the bittersweet things for me is I've worked with you for 11 years now, and
Wow, yeah.
not sure how our paths will cross. I guess we can have CAS old timer reunions someday somewhere, right? Maybe come back
Absolutely.
to Alexandria and have all of us get together. But I certainly appreciate your leadership and service to CAS over these 18 years, and certainly sticking it out. Because I don't know, I think when I started, and it's maybe the same case for you, I don't know that it was my intention to be involved for this long, but all of a
Not
sudden
at all.
you wake up and you're the president, and then you're like, woo, how did that happen? So,
Right.
and certainly, if anyone has been a president of an organization like this, those of us who do it know that it's a labor of love, and that it's a big time commitment in addition to all the things many of us do. And most of us that also volunteer are probably really busy professionals. So thank you, Ralph, for your service, and thank you for this visit today. And once again, I am pleased to wrap this up. This is a discussion with Ralph Johnson, who was our CAS 10th president, and our current past president. I'm soon to join those ranks, but I'm not necessarily counting the days. So thank you, Ralph.
Absolutely. Enjoyed it very much. Take care, Gail.
Okay.